Hey everyone, welcome back for another Dip Dive. Today we're tackling a topic that I think is super relevant to, well, pretty much everyone these days, dopamine detox.
Ooh, dopamine detox. That sounds intense.
Yeah, it does have a bit of a dramatic flair to it, right? But really, it's all about understanding how our brains work and how we can work with our brains to achieve our goals, instead of constantly battling against distractions.
I'm intrigued.
We're going to be diving deep into the book Dopamine Detox, a short guide to eliminate distractions and train your brain to do hard things. It's a really practical guide, and it busts some pretty big myths right off the bat, like the idea that dopamine is the pleasure chemical.
Oh yeah, I heard that one, that dopamine equals pleasure. But the book says that's not quite right.
Not exactly, and this is where things get really interesting. So maybe you can break this down for us. What is dopamine's role if it's not just about making us feel good?
So dopamine doesn't actually make us feel pleasure directly. It's more about the anticipation of a reward. It's like the driving force that pushes us towards certain activities, even if those activities don't actually bring us lasting happiness.
Okay, that's fascinating. So it's not about the feeling itself, it's about the wanting, the craving.
Exactly. The book uses a really great phrase to describe it: the molecule of more. Dopamine is constantly pushing us towards seeking more stimulation, more rewards, which can create this, this kind of endless cycle.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like we get a little hit of dopamine from something like, I don't know, checking our phone for notifications, and then we crave that feeling again, so we keep checking, even if it's not actually making us happier in the long run.
Exactly. And the thing is, a lot of companies, especially social media companies, have figured out how to tap into this system. They've become masters at using dopamine to keep us hooked on their platforms.
It's like they're hacking our brains.
In a way, yes. They use things like notifications, algorithms that constantly feed us more of what we've already engaged with, and even, the fear of missing out that keeps us constantly scrolling, constantly checking.
It reminds me of this study that the book talks about, where you watch a couple of videos on Facebook about a certain topic, and then bam, your entire feed is flooded with similar suggestions.
Oh yeah, I've experienced that.
Right. It's like, whoa, how did they know? But it's not magic. It's just them expertly leveraging our dopamine systems to keep us engaged.
And the crazy thing is, while we're busy chasing those little dopamine hits from our phones and our feeds, we're missing out on the things that really matter. The things that require sustained effort and deep thinking, the things that actually lead to long-term fulfillment.
Like working towards our goals, building meaningful relationships, all the stuff that's important but doesn't necessarily give us that instant gratification.
Exactly. And the book even brings up Steve Jobs, the tech giant himself, who famously restricted his own children's access to technology. He saw the potential dangers of overstimulation even back then.
That's a really interesting point. So if we're constantly bombarding our brains with these quick hits of dopamine, it makes sense that it would be harder to focus on those bigger, more challenging tasks, the things that actually move us forward in life.
Absolutely. And that's where this idea of a dopamine detox comes in. It's about resetting our sensitivity to dopamine, breaking free from that constant cycle of craving and reward seeking.
So it's not about eliminating dopamine entirely, because that wouldn't even be possible, right? We need dopamine to function.
Right. It's not about getting rid of dopamine altogether. It's more about reclaiming control over our attention and our choices.
It's like hitting the reset button on our brains, giving ourselves a chance to break free from those patterns of behavior that aren't really serving us.
Exactly. And the book outlines 3 different types of detox, depending on your comfort level and your goals. There's a 48-hour full detox, a 24-hour version, and even a partial detox where you focus on your biggest source of stimulation.
So listeners, it's like choosing your level of difficulty. Which one do you think might work for you?
And remember, the point of a dopamine detox isn't to punish yourself. It's not about deprivation. It's about creating space for the things that bring you true joy and fulfillment.
It's about making time for the activities that we often neglect when we're caught up in that constant cycle of stimulation and distraction.
Things like meditation, spending time in nature, having deep conversations with loved ones, even just allowing ourselves to be bored sometimes.
Okay, so we've talked about the why of dopamine detox, but let's get into the how. The book lays out a really clear 3-step method for actually doing a dopamine detox.
Sounds good. I'm ready to hear about these steps.
Me too. So step 1 is all about identifying your distractions. What does that look like in practice?
It starts with being honest with yourself about what's really stealing your focus. The book suggests making a list of your cans and your can'ts. Like, what are you allowing yourself to do during this detox? And more importantly, what are you not allowing yourself to do?
So it's about setting clear boundaries for your attention. And then step 2 is where things get really interesting. It's about adding friction.
Friction.
Yeah, and I love this concept. It's about making those bad habits harder to access. Like if you know you spend too much time scrolling on your phone, put it in another room or delete those tempting apps.
Ah, I see. So instead of relying on willpower alone, you're actually changing your environment to make it easier to make good choices.
Exactly. And the book even talks about the author moving their internet modem to the storage room to make it harder to go online.
Wow, that's dedication.
Right. It might seem extreme, but it just highlights the power of creating those barriers to temptation. And then finally, step 3 is all about starting your day, right?
What does that entail?
It's about beginning your day with low stimulation. So instead of waking up and immediately checking your phone or turning on the TV, try something calming like meditation, stretching, or just enjoying a cup of coffee in silence.
That sounds so peaceful. And I could see how it would set a totally different tone for the day.
Right. It's like you're priming your brain for focus and intention. But let's be real, even with the best intentions, we're all bound to slip up at some point, right?
Of course, relapses are totally normal. No one's perfect.
So how do we deal with those moments when we fall back into old habits? Does the book offer any guidance on that?
It does. And one of the most important things is self-awareness. It's about noticing when you're starting to feel that urge, that pull towards those distractions.
Like having that mental early warning system.
Exactly. And it's also about having a plan in place for when those urges inevitably arise.
Like a contingency plan for your attention.
I like that. It's about thinking ahead and preparing for those moments of weakness so you're not just reacting in the moment.
So we've covered the 3 steps of the dopamine detox, and we've talked about the importance of self-awareness and having a plan for dealing with relapses. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about how to actually apply this newfound focus to getting things done. Because breaking free from the dopamine loop is one thing, but channeling that energy into productive action is a whole other challenge.
You're absolutely right, and that's something the book addresses head on. It emphasizes that dopamine detox isn't just about avoiding things, it's about doing things. And it all starts with effective planning.
Okay, so let's dive into that. How does the book recommend we approach planning in a way that supports our dopamine detox goals?
Well, first of all, ditch the fancy apps and go old school. The book is a big advocate for pen and paper when it comes to planning.
Really? No digital tools allowed?
For this, it's best to keep it simple. There's something about physically writing down your goals that just makes them more real. It's like you're solidifying the commitment in a way that typing just doesn't quite capture.
I can see that. It's more tangible. So what about prioritizing? How do we decide what to focus on when we've got a million things on our to-do list?
The book suggests identifying your key task for the day. Ask yourself, if you could only accomplish one thing today, what would move you closest to your goals?
That's a great question. It forces you to really think about what's truly important, doesn't it?
It does. And often that key task is the one we're most likely to procrastinate on.
Yeah.
Because it might be challenging or just not that exciting, even if it's really important.
That's so true. And this is where the dopamine detox comes in handy, right? By reducing our reliance on those quick hits of dopamine, we're more likely to find those essential tasks, even the less glamorous ones, more appealing.
Exactly. It's like we're retraining our brains to find satisfaction in the process itself, not just the end result.
So we've talked about planning and prioritizing. What are some other strategies the book offers for cultivating that laser focus?
Well, one of the most effective strategies is establishing a consistent routine. Find a specific time and place for your most important work every single day. You're basically creating a ritual that signals to your brain, okay, it's focus time.
Interesting. So it's about building that mental muscle, training your brain to enter a state of deep concentration on cue.
Right. And the book even suggests choosing a specific trigger to kick off your routine. Something simple like making a cup of tea or listening to a certain song. You're essentially associating that action with the mindset of focus.
And then the magic happens when you simply start. Even if it's just for a few minutes, the act of beginning builds momentum and often leads to that flow state we all crave.
Flow state, that feeling of being totally immersed in the task where time just seems to disappear.
Exactly. But of course, the book is realistic. It acknowledges that distractions are inevitable, so it recommends creating a distraction-free environment as much as possible.
Yes, absolutely. Turning off notifications, silencing your phone, maybe even using website blockers if you need to. Anything that helps minimize those external triggers that pull us away from our work.
Because even a brief lapse in focus can really derail our productivity, can't it?
It can. And that brings us back to the concept of open versus closed systems, which we touched upon earlier.
Right. Can you remind our listeners what those are all about?
Sure. Open systems, like your email inbox or social media feeds, they're constantly offering new information and potential distractions. They're designed to keep us hooked with that promise of something new and exciting.
Whereas closed systems have defined boundaries.
Exactly. Think of a specific work document, a focused project, a task with a clear endpoint. Working within those boundaries helps us direct our attention without the constant pull of external stimuli.
So the challenge for our listeners is to identify those open systems in their own lives and think about how to minimize their influence.
It's about being mindful of where your attention is going and making deliberate choices about how you spend your time and energy. For example, instead of starting your day by checking email or social media, which are open systems, try tackling a task with a clear beginning and end, a closed system. This helps to set a more intentional tone for the day.
That's a great tip. It's about being proactive with your attention, making conscious choices about where you direct your energy instead of just reacting to whatever pops up on your screen.
Exactly. And even with the best strategies, the book acknowledges that relapses are normal. We're only human.
So what can we do when we find ourselves slipping back into those old habits?
Cultivate self-awareness. Notice when you're getting overstimulated, when your focus is waning, and those temptations are calling.
Like having that mental early warning system in place.
Exactly. And having a contingency plan for those moments. Think ahead about the situations that might trigger a relapse and have a strategy ready to deal with them.
Because it's a constant battle, isn't it? The world is designed to grab our attention, and it takes real effort to resist those forces.
It does. But the rewards are worth it. When you reclaim your ability to focus, you reclaim your agency. You decide what deserves your attention, not external forces dictating your priorities.
And that brings us back to that core question from the book. Are you choosing to control your focus, or are you letting someone else take it away from you?
It's a question worth asking ourselves regularly, because the truth is we have more control over our attention than we often realize. It's a matter of developing the awareness and the strategies to wield that power. And speaking of strategies, one of the most powerful ones, as the book suggests, is cultivating those here and now neurotransmitters that promote calmness and presence.
Things like meditation, stretching, deep social interaction, and even, wait for it, boredom.
That's right. As counterintuitive as it may sound, boredom allows our brains to rest and reset, breaking free from that constant craving for stimulation.
I'm intrigued. Can you elaborate on that a little? What do you mean by allowing our brains to rest and reset?
Well, when we constantly bombard our minds with external stimulation, we don't leave much space for our own thoughts and feelings to surface. Embracing boredom allows those things to come to the forefront. It can spark creativity, lead to new insights, and even help us connect more deeply with ourselves and the world around us.
It's like giving our attention a much-needed vacation. And on that note, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive into dopamine detox with some final thoughts and challenges for putting these principles into action in your own life.
Sounds good. See you on the other side. Welcome back, everyone. We left off talking about how boredom, surprisingly, can be good for our brains.
Yeah, kind of a radical idea in our always-on world, isn't it? But we were about to get into the nitty-gritty of actually using that newfound focus from a dopamine detox. Because, okay, less distractions, that's great. But what about actually getting things done?
Right, because the point isn't just to sit around being bored all day. It's about using that mental clarity to achieve our goals, to create, to work on things we care about.
And the book doesn't disappoint. It goes deep into strategies for turning that detoxed brain into a productivity powerhouse. Starting with, wait for it, planning.
Oh, the dreaded P word.
I know, right? But hear me out, because the book's approach is actually really refreshing. No fancy apps, no complex systems. Just you, a pen, and some paper.
Old school. I like it.
Me too. And there's something about physically writing down your goals that just makes them feel more real, you know?
So you're making a contract with yourself.
Exactly. So pen and paper, check. Next up, we've got to figure out how to prioritize all those tasks swirling around in our heads. Because let's be real, our to-do lists can get pretty overwhelming.
Totally. And this is where the book introduces the concept of the key task. Basically, you ask yourself, if I could only do one thing today, What would move me closest to my goals?
Ooh, that's good. It really forces you to get to the heart of what's truly important, doesn't it?
It does, and often that key task, the one that's most impactful, is also the one we're most likely to procrastinate on.
Ugh, yes, so true, because it might be challenging or time-consuming or maybe just not that fun, even if it's really important in the long run.
Exactly. And this is where the benefits of a dopamine detox really shine.
Mm.
By reducing our reliance on those quick hits of dopamine, we're less likely to get sucked into those easier, more instantly gratifying tasks, and more likely to stick with those essential, but maybe less immediately rewarding activities.
So we're basically rewiring our brains to find satisfaction in the process itself, not just the end result.
Precisely. And it's not just about planning and prioritizing. The book also emphasizes the power of establishing a consistent routine. Find a specific time and place for your most important work and do it every single day.
So like building a habit.
Exactly. You're creating a ritual that signals to your brain, okay, it's focus time. And the book even suggests choosing a specific trigger to kick off your routine. Something simple, like making a cup of tea or listening to a certain song.
Oh, I love that. It's like a mental cue to switch into work mode.
Right. And then the magic happens when you simply start. Even if it's just for a few minutes. The act of beginning often builds momentum and leads to that coveted flow state.
Ah, flow state, where time melts away and you're completely absorbed in what you're doing. It's the holy grail of productivity.
It is.
Yeah.
But let's be real. Even with the best intentions, distractions are a fact of life. So the book wisely recommends creating a distraction-free environment as much as possible.
Turning off notifications, silencing your phone, maybe even using website blockers if you need to, whatever it takes to minimize those external triggers.
Because even a brief interruption can derail your focus and make it that much harder to get back on track.
So true. And this is where the whole idea of open versus closed systems comes into play again.
Right. Open systems, like your email inbox or social media feeds, are constantly offering new information and potential distractions. They're designed to keep us hooked with that promise of something new and exciting. But closed systems, like a specific work document or a focused project, have defined boundaries. Working within those boundaries helps us direct our attention without the constant pull of external stimuli.
So it's about being mindful of which systems we're engaging with and making deliberate choices about where we direct our attention.
Exactly. And instead of starting your day by checking those open systems like email and social media, try tackling a task with a clear beginning and end, a closed system. This helps to set a more intentional tone for the day.
It's about being proactive with your attention, making conscious choices about where you direct your energy, instead of just reacting to whatever pops up on your screen.
Well said. But even with the best strategies in place, relapses are a normal part of the process.
We're only human, after all. So what can we do to navigate those moments when we find ourselves slipping back into old habits?
The book emphasizes the importance of self-awareness. Notice when you're getting overstimulated, when your focus is waning, and those temptations are calling.
Like having that mental early warning system.
Exactly, and having a contingency plan for those moments. Think ahead about the situations that might trigger a relapse and have a strategy ready to deal with them. Because it's a constant battle, isn't it? The world is designed to grab our attention, and it takes real effort to resist those forces.
It does, but the rewards are worth it. When you reclaim your ability to focus, you reclaim your agency. You decide what deserves your attention, not external forces dictating your priorities. And that brings us back to that core question from the book.
You mean, are you choosing to control your focus, or are you letting someone else take it away from you?
That's the one. It's a question worth asking ourselves regularly. Because the truth is, we have more control over our attention than we often realize. It's a matter of developing the awareness and the strategies to wield that power. And one of the most powerful strategies, as the book suggests, is cultivating those here and now neurotransmitters that promote calmness and presence. Things like meditation, stretching, deep social interaction, and even boredom.
That's right. As counterintuitive as it may sound, boredom allows our brains to rest and reset, breaking free from that constant craving for stimulation.
I'm starting to see the appeal. It's like giving our attention a much-needed vacation. So we've explored some really powerful strategies for putting the principles of dopamine detox into action. But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear what resonated most with you from the book.
Well, what really struck me is the idea that dopamine detox isn't just about productivity. It's about creating a life that's filled with the things that truly matter to you.
It's about finding joy in the present moment, connecting with others, and discovering a sense of purpose that goes beyond those fleeting dopamine hits.
Exactly. It's about designing a life that's actually worth focusing on. And that's something I think we can all aspire to.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of dopamine detox.
And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about progress. Even small steps towards reclaiming your attention can have a huge impact on your well-being and your ability to live a more intentional, fulfilling life.
Well said. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.